taking into account the circumstances and the compulsions of a coalition polity, I have done as best as I could do under the circumstances.
Mr. Rajneesh Kumar, you must have, of course, read into all the big, important decisions he took, whether in capacity of the RBI, whether in capacity of the Finance Minister or the Prime Minister. How would you read into what he did? How would you read into his leadership style and his decision-making prowess that he really showed across his tenures in multiple capacities?
I come from the banking and financial sector, and the contribution which Dr. Singh made to this sector is immense. We don't realize that what was the situation of financial sector markets and banking before 91 and the economy got open. The banking sector reforms were launched. Even every crisis like Harshad Mehta crisis, which was a big crisis for the government then, but that opportunity was also used to launch the reforms in the capital markets. So in 24, when we look back and compare it, what was the situation in 1990, it has changed beyond recognition. I am speaking only from financial sector perspective, but today what India is in terms of economic growth and its stature on the world stage, it can largely be attributed to the financial sector economic reforms which were launched in 1991 when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister. Everybody knows what was his style of functioning. A lot has been said. I had the opportunity to interact very briefly when I was chairman SBI and parliamentary committee meetings. He was member. And I was so impressed with his humility and a man who has been Prime Minister for 10 years, simply clad, very humble, easily approachable. So these are the qualities which makes a leader a great leader. It's not the power which makes a leader a great leader. It is the qualities of humility, humbleness, politeness, and apart from I didn't have to say much about his intellectual capabilities. But I think he is one of the architects of modern India, and this nation, we owe a lot to him.
Absolutely, Mr. Kumar, and you've actually put it and summarized his legacy and the impact that he's had actually in the financial sector of India as well as the banking sector in India, and given the fact that he's made sure that India stands out in much of this global clutter. And I just wanted to add on to that or ask you some more on that. Which of his reform do you think was the landmark one when you talk about the banking sector and the fruits of which we are still enjoying?
Oh, the Narasimhan Committee, which recommended which laid down the roadmap for the banking sector reforms. It was when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Finance Minister, and that laid the foundation of bringing in private banks and the competition into the banking sector. There were many other reforms. The list is long, and I have witnessed the banking era before the reforms. Of course, at that time, we were much junior in the banking sector, but the path laid down by the Narasimhan Committee for the banking sector reforms, it has made the banking sector what it is today. And if there was no competition and we just had the private sector, if we did not have the private sector banks coming into mid-90s, the banking sector probably would have been still maybe backward. And the spirit of competition, modernization, consumer banking, this all came in because private sector banks came in. The capital market reforms were the establishment of SEBI as a market regulator, the NSE, and then the modernization, digitization. So the list goes on. But the foundation was laid in mid-90s, and this was the result of all the reforms initiated.
We have Mr. K.K. Misri, who is joining us on the show right now to actually reflect upon the life, the legacy that Dr. Singh has left us with. Thank you so much, Mr. Misri, for joining us, as well as we have D. Subbarao also joining us. I'll come very shortly to you, Mr. Subbarao. Let me take this question to Mr. Misri. And yes, we all are remembering Dr. Singh today for his life, his legacy, and as a stellar economist and a statesman.
Yes, absolutely. I think he was a figure of integrity, towering figure, I would say, towering figure of integrity and intellect. He will always be known for his power of perseverance, humility, his visionary leadership. He was really the architect of the economic revolution in India. I remember the 1992 budget, which will always be remembered as a dream budget, as it opened the Indian economy to foreign investment. So he done so much for India. Today, where we are today, the foundation of that was laid in 1992 when he was the finance minister.
Mr. Misri, let me come back to you. One more special quality that Dr. Manmohan Singh had was the power to take everyone along, and not just, you know, in terms of the allies and the political relations. I'm also talking about the way he strengthened the international relations. I think he was one of those first prime ministers who deepened the tie with the United States, whether it was with relation to the nuclear treaty and others as well, and of course globalization and liberalization. Your take on that?
Absolutely correct. I think not only did he display extraordinary courage and foresight, particularly at a time when India was facing an economic crisis, when he boldly introduced reforms that really transformed the economy. But when he became prime minister, at that time also he continued to steer India with a steady hand. He championed so many landmark initiatives like the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the Right to Information Act, all of which empowered millions of people. And also, as you said, his foreign relations, the time he started building the relationships with the U.S. at that time. But what really sets him apart was his quiet dignity, his unwavering commitment to public services, and despite all his towering achievements, as Mr. Subbarao said, he was always so very, very, very humble.
In fact, we also have S.K. Munjal, the chairman at Hero Enterprise, joining us. What really inspires you, or what is the key legacy factor that you will really remember Dr. Manmohan Singh with?
Well, I had numerous occasions to interact with him on the Prime Minister's Council for Trade and Industry, through many of the different committees and councils that I worked on. Also, on his urging, Sunil Mittal, Analjeet Singh, and myself went ahead and set up the institution in Mohali, which became the ISB's second campus. So with him, I had multiple occasions, and I always came away exactly as you said, feeling like you met a special person. Very simple, very humble, very erudite. I remember once when I went to ask him to do a foreword for a book I had written called The Making of Hero. And because the book was about my father and his brothers, he took no time to say yes. And I understand later on that he went through a note which he corrected multiple times that he sent and finally went into the book. And then again, on requesting him, he also came for the launch of the book, even though he wasn't quite in the best of health at that time. He truly was a special individual. I think he was a gift to the country. At a time when the country was struggling and suffering, he helped us with hope, helped us with the new direction. Along with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, they launched the biggest ever transformation in this country of financial and administrative reform. And today, we are continuing with this government to see the benefits of the reform that was started in the early 90s.
Munjal, he was a gift for our nation. Also, the 1991 economic reforms being the watershed moment when you talk about the Indian economy. And you've just mentioned that you've also worked very closely with Dr. Singh. How would you actually describe his approach when it comes to leadership, decision making, especially when there have been actually complex economic challenges as well?
So it was interesting. He was a consensus maker. He would always like to listen to a number of people in the room before giving his own view. And he was a thorough gentleman. I'm not sure anybody could have heard a rough or a difficult word from him. And but he did make some very tough calls. If you remember, sending out India's gold to be pledged overseas, fighting for the nuclear agreement with the US. There were many occasions when he dug his heels in and stood his ground, trying to create an environment in J&K which would grow the economy, trying to build the rural economy in India, not just in agriculture, but other than agriculture. The big reform that he did on providing the support to every poor rural family of 100 days of work a year. So there are many things that he triggered, of which we are all beneficiaries. Just the simple thing like right to education, right to information. I think some of them were path-breaking, especially at the time when everything was always completely controlled.
Well, yes, absolutely. Some of those very difficult decisions, but as you said, he was a consensus builder, and that's what the nation thanks him for. But Mr. Munjal, in your own, in your workings with him, any anecdote that you would want to share with us, apart from the fact that you talked about the book and the multiple iterations he made, any other anecdote that you would want to share and rejoice and celebrate his legacy?
Sure. When we had decided to acquire Honda's stake in our joint venture, Hero Honda, my brother Pawan and I went to meet with him. And it was amazing how warm he was, how encouraging he was. He said, look, we have to bring in global business into India. But at the same time, we have to turn Indian companies global. And you guys are building the first-class example of an Indian company not only becoming global, but becoming a global leader. He was very encouraging, very supportive, and very warm of the entire transaction that took place with Honda. And we did try and make sure it was peaceful, it was friendly, right through and also to the end.
Right.
I also invited him to visit the ISB in Hyderabad, the Indian School of Business, and he came in there, he spent some time, and then when it was the 5th year, I actually invited him to the Mohali campus, where also he came and visited. By then, he had actually, he was no longer Prime Minister when he came second time to Mohali. So there are just so many occasions to have had interacted with him. I remember once he had invited many of the Panch leaders, the panchayats from across the country. And after the meeting, he said to me, tell me what is it that we can do to fire up the entire rural economy other than agriculture. So we conceived a project called the Rural Business Hubs, which then got launched to revive India's artisanal skills and crafts, and also value add post-harvest. So he was a person who was concerned about humanity at large and interested in developing all of India, every section of society, not just industry, not just the top end of India.
Not just industry, not one end, but across the spectrum is what he had an eye on, and he had his fingers on pretty much the nerve of India, and that's what really made him stand out and the erudite leader he was. Mr. Munjal, on that note, we let you go. The legacy that Dr. Manmohan Singh has left behind, and the fact that he was a true gentleman when it comes to the politicians, as well as the fact that he did a lot which has transformed the economic situation in the country. We will be joined shortly by Mr. Ramesh Damani as well. He's of course seen a lot of his era. Mr. Damani, hi, thanks so much for making time and speaking with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's actually a bittersweet day in the sense that it is sweet because you remember him so fondly for all his accomplishments. Bitter, of course, legend has passed into the yonder, so we miss him. But at the same time, we are celebrated with joy because it is one man who upheld and delivered India to a higher standard of living. It is Dr. Manmohan Singh. And some of your viewers who are older might remember that when he delivered the budget in 1991, July 24th, 1991, a benchmark day in Indian economic history, he actually quoted Victor Hugo, who was a French poet and philosopher, when he said, "No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come." The idea whose time has come, he was referring to India Incorporated. He stepped to the table and changed India's economic trajectory completely on that day. I think we can never overestimate anything about him. I think that has been truly one of the, we did get our independence on August 15th, 1947, but our economic independence was assured on July 24th, 1991. Some of the things he did that day, the scrapping of the license Raj, the cutting of the tax rates, the listing of the PSUs, the introduction of SEBI, the introduction of right to information later in his career, are all the legacies or all the shoulders that today the Indian economy and the capital markets stand on. It is, without any fear of overestimation, an unmatched legacy. And I think we are so lucky, the cohort of people like me who were part of what is called the Midnight Children, born a bit after independence. We grew up in the age of liberalization, so we didn't know the struggles that our forefathers went through. And we have only one person to thank for that, and that is Dr. Manmohan Singh.
Fondly remembered, Mr. Damani, and you've also gone ahead and on record also a couple of times did mention the fact that the best time to invest in India was in 1991, and you did actually talk about that as well, the historic, the landmark budget and the liberalization of the Indian economy. But when you had Dr. Singh, who was the Prime Minister, and during his tenure as the Prime Minister of the country, we did see a lot of global challenges as well. You had the 2008 financial crisis as well. Despite all of that, how well did he perform when you talk about the Indian economy and making sure that we rose out of all of those global mess?
Yeah, a great question. I have mentioned that many times. The best time to invest in India was July 24th, 1991, when Dr. Singh spread on the well of the parliament and dedicated his budget to the nation. It was. But the beauty of the economic reforms that Dr. Singh unleashed in 1991, and this we're talking after a period of 35 years, the beauty of the reforms is that it is still a good time to invest. It is because of the legacy that has been carried forward by successive finance ministers, successive governments, successive administrations, that we are still enjoying the fruit. I mean, your viewers and readers might not remember, but in 91-92, the Indian economy was subpar in scale, maybe $200 billion market cap of the Indian economy. Maybe direct tax collections of 10, 20,000 crores. We can now do more like 24 lakh crores of direct and indirect taxes. So, as they say in that old ad, we've come a long way, baby. And the person who guided us through this, first as the RBI governor, then, of course, as the finance minister of absolute, undisputed importance, and then, of course, 10 years as prime minister, has been the man who we mourn today. What an inspiring legacy for not only my generation, but the next generation.
Not only about his conduct in all of those, on his career path, it's also his conduct beyond what he did in terms of his humility, a genuine need to improve the humankind and a genuine need to improve the life of citizens. And that was his motto throughout his career, whether it was the initial bit when, he left his job in the United Nations to come back and teach in a university in India. And the fact that there is that anecdote that, does round that he was asked to join politics much earlier, but he refused that because at that point of time he wanted to teach students and be a professor. I mean, just speaks galore about the personality that he was.
Absolutely very true. I think he was a left-leaning economist, but he rose to the time, he read the room, rose to the occasion. He and Narasimha Rao, one of the more unlikely pairs in Indian politics, running a minority government, pushed through some of the most important changes in independent Indian history. He did that, and as you will also recall, that he is one of the few prime ministers, there's been no corruption allegations in his 40-year blemishless career. There'll be no corruption allegation. I think the nation owes, as you correctly pointed out, a debt of gratitude to him, his three daughters and his wife. We mourn and sympathize with him. It's been an extraordinary journey, and he's led actually one of the great public lives in India, and we are blessed. India is blessed to have a great son like him, to have led our country in so many capacities.
Thank you so much, Mr. Damani, for joining us on the show and helping us also fondly remember Dr. Manmohan Singh.
The day was 24th of July 1991. It was a day that changed the course of India's growth story, one that made every Indian dream big. And a large part of the credit goes to this man, a Congress veteran, Dr. Manmohan Singh. And on this day, the then Finance Minister presented his first ever budget, one that would be remembered for decades to come. The government by then was already going through testing times. Facing increasing oil prices and a fall in remittances from Indian workers owing to the Gulf War, the Indian state was on the verge of a sovereign default. At $6 billion, India had just enough forex reserves to support 2 weeks of imports. Harsh decisions had to be taken. The government, under the leadership of P.V. Narasimha Rao, then decided to devalue the Indian rupee and pledge gold holdings as immediate measure to shore up forex reserves. But it was a new industrial policy unveiled on the eve of the budget under the patronage of Manmohan Singh that proved to be the game changer. The policy relaxed provisions in Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act to facilitate easier entry and restructuring of businesses. The policy ended the public sector monopoly in many sectors. It also announced a policy for automatic approval of FDI up to 51%, as against the existing cap of 40% for foreign equity investments. These dramatic changes ended public sector monopoly in several sectors, except in those that were deemed critical to national security. These changes not only led to a steep upturn in the foreign goods entering Indian markets, but also a dramatic rise in foreign investment in the years to come. But the reforms didn't end there. Manmohan Singh took it further with multiple drastic changes to stall what seemed to be a crisis spiraling out of control for the country in 1991. Faced with a fiscal deficit, the budget increased corporate tax rates to 45%. The government also opened mutual funds to the private sector and relaxed investment norms for non-residents. These measures were followed by the introduction of a second trade policy package to boost exports and a package for developing small firms. Seeking immediate economic relief, he also applied for an emergency loan of $220 million to the IMF, which later proved to be critical in preventing a debt default for the nation. As the Finance Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh took drastic measures which not only rescued the nation but also propelled India into rapid economic growth. As the nation mourns the loss of one of India's greatest minds, the country will forever remain indebted to the astute economist who changed the course of India's growth story.